60 seconds, CEO Lena Harrow laughed, pointing at the stripped $550 Pontiac. Find one original factory race part, and you can have the whole car. Fail, and it goes straight to the crusher tomorrow. Laugh. The crowd laughed with her. Daniel Reed, a single father who desperately needed Harrow's fleet contract to keep his garage alive, slid beneath the car as the timer began. With 20 seconds remaining, Lena turned toward the cameras. Desperate mechanics see treasure in every pile of junk. Daniel ignored her. The holes running through the frame weren't rust. They were too clean, too evenly spaced. With 7 seconds left, he scraped black paint from a hidden bracket. Breath. Bright aluminum flashed underneath. Daniel rolled out and placed the metal flake on Lena's signed challenge card. Stop the clock. Lena's smile vanished. Breath. Then Daniel's 15-year-old son lifted a discarded seat frame and found a folded factory tag beneath one spring. The moment Lena saw the stamped numbers, she ordered the Pontiac, and every loose part around it placed under immediate hold. But she still refused to say what Daniel had actually found. The Pontiac had arrived at Harrow Collector Auctions as part of a county impound liquidation. It looked like something even a parts thief had given up on. The interior was gone. The hood and trunk lid wore gray primer. A later model V8 sat between the fenders with no carburetor. Every badge had been removed. Someone had painted the aluminum pieces black, making them look like cheap replacements. The frame contained so many holes that Lena's yard manager labeled it unsafe before checking whether the holes followed a pattern. The $550 figure was not an appraisal. It was the minimum salvage bid. If no one raised a paddle, the Pontiac would go from the yard to a crusher Friday afternoon. Daniel had come to Harrow's Thursday preview to inspect 3 fleet sedans for a repair contract. Reed Service Garage maintained delivery vans, plumbing trucks, and municipal pickups. Collector cars were a weekend interest he shared with Mason, not the business paying their rent. Daniel needed Harrow's 14-vehicle fleet account because a warehouse customer had closed, leaving a third of his schedule empty. Lena knew that when she made the challenge. She was 46, precise, and better informed than people assumed. Her company did not become the largest specialty auction yard in Ohio by throwing away valuable cars every week. She employed catalogers, title clerks, and outside appraisers. The Pontiac had been photographed, checked for public identification numbers, and rejected as an altered shell. Her promotional crew decided it would make a useful video. Elegant auction executive lets struggling mechanics search, hopeless junk, crowd laughs, crusher wins. Daniel spoiled the ending with 7 seconds still on the clock. Before the clock started, he had asked Lena to put the promise on the lot card. She wrote, "Find one original factory race component in 60 seconds, and car goes to finder," then signed beneath the company stamp. The auction clerk, Nina Park, time-stamped it because every promotional transfer had to enter inventory control. Lena treated the card as theater. Daniel treated it as a contract. Now she lifted it from the folding table. "You identified a material," she told the crowd. "You didn't identify a component." Daniel pointed under the nose. "The bracket is a component. The frame is another. Assuming either came from Pontiac. Then, stop the crusher and let us test them." The crowd had stopped laughing. Most were older men who knew just enough about early 60s drag racing to recognize the phrase, factory weight reduction. They moved closer without being asked. Lena's videographer kept filming. Mason approached with the seat frame held at his waist. "Dad." Daniel saw the narrow tag but did not take it. The frame had been lying in a marked scrap zone beside the Pontiac. Whether it belonged to the car required a chain of custody. He asked Nina to film the location before anyone moved farther. "It was under that broken bench," Mason said. The tag showed a sequence of letters and numbers, some stamped, some grease-penciled. 2 tiny holes at its ends aligned with torn wire loops under the seat spring. Lena told Nina to bag the tag as Harrow property. "If the seat frame was included in lot 118, it follows the lot," Daniel said. "There is no lot. The auction was canceled." Nina opened the inventory tablet. Lot 118 includes body shell, rolling chassis, loose seat frame, glass fragments, and miscellaneous trim in the striped zone. Lena looked at her clerk, then at the cameras. "Secure all of it pending review." That was reasonable. The way she did it was not. She ordered yard workers to place separate hold tags on the body, chassis, bracket, seat frame, and production tag. By dividing the Pontiac into 5 disputed objects, She created room to argue that Daniel had won only the aluminum bracket. Daniel photographed the signed card before Nina sealed it in a clear sleeve. He asked for a duplicate receipt showing the car on hold. Nina printed one. Lena lowered her voice. "You came here for a fleet agreement. Don't turn a publicity stunt into a lawsuit. I performed the condition you wrote. You made an unsupported claim in front of a camera. Then an inspection protects both of us. And if the inspection shows backyard drilling, I take the $550 shell and pay to tow it." Lena studied him. She had expected greed or excitement. Daniel offered to accept the downside. "You have until noon tomorrow to provide credible evidence," she said. "No destructive testing. My staff controls access. Put that on the hold receipt." She did, adding that Harrow reserved all rights. Daniel and Mason returned to Reed Service Garage with no Pontiac and no fleet contract. The shop occupied an old brick tire store near Dayton. It had 4 bays, 1 alignment rack, and a waiting room Daniel's late wife had painted the color of coffee with too much milk. Breath. Ellen had died 7 years earlier after a short illness, and Daniel had resisted every suggestion to repaint. He told customers the walls did not need maintenance. Mason knew better. Daniel was 53 and had spent 31 years fixing vehicles other people needed for work. He could rebuild a differential, but he did not pretend to authenticate rare race cars. His specific skill was measuring load paths and chassis geometry. Early in his career, he straightened wrecked ladder frames under an old foreman who made apprentices map every factory hole before pulling steel. A hole could locate a bracket, relieve weight, route a line, or reveal damage. Pattern meant purpose. His limitation was history. Daniel remembered mechanical forms better than production codes. He needed records and independent people. At the garage, Mason pulled up photographs of documented early 60s Pontiac drag packages. Several showed large aluminum panels, heater-delete equipment, reinforced suspension mounts, and frames drilled with rows of circular openings. Collectors called some of them Swiss cheese cars, though Daniel disliked the nickname. Swiss cheese was random to the eye. A factory jig was a plan. "This proves Pontiac did it," Mason said. "It proves Pontiac did it to some cars. The holes look the same. Looking the same gets us permission to measure. It doesn't identify a chassis. They built a test plan before calling anyone. First, map every frame hole by diameter and position. Second, check whether paint, oxidation, and tool marks were consistent across the pattern. Third, use handheld alloy analysis on the bracket and accessible body panels. Fourth, document heater-delete features, axle mounts, and weld dates. Fifth, trace the production tag from the seat frame. No scraping, cutting, or removal without written consent." Daniel called Dr. Ruth Calder, who ran a materials lab at Sinclair Technical College. Years earlier, Reed Service Garage had repaired the college's training vans at cost. Ruth agreed to bring a portable analyzer, but she warned that alloy composition could establish period consistency, not prove which car a panel came from. He called Andre Collins, owner of a metrology company that scanned stamping dies and industrial fixtures. Andre had once hired Daniel to diagnose a trailer frame that distorted under load. He could scan the frame Friday morning, but his commercial rate was $1,900. Daniel looked at the shop schedule. 2 open days meant no incoming cash. Losing the fleet account would matter more than $1,900, yet spending it on a car he might not own was not prudent. Mason opened his savings app. "I have $600. No, you let me buy half the project motorcycle. That was yours either way. This could be ours." That sentence is why the answer is no. Daniel put the scan deposit on his business card. It was his first consequential choice after accepting the challenge. He would test the claim at his own cost, and if wrong, he would own the mistake. At 7 that evening, Nina emailed the complete intake photographs. She did it under Harrow's evidence policy, not as a favor. The photographs showed the Pontiac arriving on a flatbed with the seat frame wired to the rear axle. A second image captured the production tag still attached beneath the spring. The wire broke while workers unloaded. Nina's inventory note recorded loose tag, retained with seat, but no separate bag existed. That closed the first chain of custody gap. Mason had found the tag where Harrow employees placed the seat. The number on the tag did not match a public vehicle identification format. It began with the letters SD, followed by 63, then a 3-digit sequence. Daniel searched discussion boards but found claims without documents. One poster called SD, special development. Another said it meant seat division. He printed both explanations and marked them unverified. At 8:40, Lena emailed a proposed resolution. Harrow would transfer the aluminum bumper bracket to Daniel and donate $5,000 to a trade school. In exchange, Daniel would acknowledge that the challenge referred to one component, not the whole lot, and would make no claim to the body or chassis. She had moved from denial to containment in less than 3 hours. Daniel replied with one sentence. The signed lot card says the car goes to the finder, so I cannot accept a bracket in place of the car. At 9:15, Harrow's fleet manager canceled Friday's contract meeting. Sigh. The message said the company was reconsidering vendors whose interests conflicted with Harrow property. The threat was polite, written, and concrete. Mason saw Daniel read it. She can't do that. She can choose who repairs her vans. Because you beat her challenge? Because she controls the account. Daniel printed the email and put it in the evidence folder. He did not call Lena angry. He did not post it online. Public outrage could pressure her, but it could also contaminate witnesses and make the case look like promotion fighting promotion. On Friday, at 7:30, Harrow opened the yard for the controlled inspection. Lena brought her attorney, Marcus Dale, and a retired body shop owner named Paul Vickers. Paul had inspected the Pontiac before the challenge and concluded that the holes were homemade. Daniel brought Ruth and Andre. Nina logged every person, camera, and instrument. The Pontiac sat on level stands beneath an open-sided inspection tent. The body remained bolted to the chassis. Red evidence seals crossed 4 mounts. Marcus began by defining the permitted work. No part could be detached. No coating could be removed. Scanning and surface alloy analysis were allowed. Daniel could inspect for 3 hours. Andre placed reflective targets along the frame and moved his scanner in slow arcs. Breath. A 3-dimensional model formed on his laptop. The rail contained 128 large holes and 36 smaller service openings. The large holes fell into mirrored sequences. Their center spacing varied by less than 0.03 of an inch where frame geometry permitted. Paul Vickers leaned toward the screen. A good racer could drill from a template. Yes, Andre said. This scan can prove repeatability. It cannot tell us who held the drill. Daniel appreciated the counterclaim. A skilled private builder could have copied a factory pattern. They needed manufacturing evidence. Under magnification, the hole edges showed faint annular marks, consistent with a piloted cutter rather than a hand torch. More important, several holes passed through areas later boxed by factory-style reinforcement plates. The inner surfaces under those plates carried the same primer as the rest of the rail. Someone had drilled the frame before the plates were welded and before the first coating. Paul suggested a private builder might have stripped and reconstructed the frame. Daniel pointed to date codes on the adjacent weld wire impressions and riveted crossmember tag. They were consistent with a single production period. Again, not final proof, but the homemade theory now required a sophisticated period rebuild, rather than a careless backyard mistake. Ruth tested the front bumper bracket, inner fender panels, and hood reinforcement with the portable analyzer. She took 3 readings at each location and read the results into the camera. The bracket and panels used an aluminum alloy common in early 60s automotive forming. The hood's outer skin was steel, but its inner reinforcement was aluminum under primer. A standard production Catalina of that year used steel in those pieces. Original factory race part, Mason whispered. Daniel shook his head slightly. Period consistent lightweight part. Ruth heard him. Correct. Material tells us what it is, not who installed it. Breath. The heater delete panel added another clue. Where a normal car had a blower opening, this firewall carried a stamped steel blank fixed with spot welds. The panel had a shallow identification mark hidden beneath paint, SD07. The production tag from the seat frame began SD63007. Daniel placed the photographs side by side without announcing a conclusion. At 10, Andre finished the scan. The whole pattern had 2 deliberate interruptions near the transmission crossmember. One side left space for a bracket not present on the later engine. The other included a reinforced oval opening. Daniel remembered seeing an engineering cutaway in an old trade journal and asked Nina for internet access to search the Library of Congress archive. Lena denied outside browsing during inspection because it was not in the protocol. Marcus corrected her. It doesn't touch the vehicle. That was Lena's first clear opportunity to accept a neutral process. She allowed the search. The journal article described factory experimentation with lighter full-size drag chassis, but did not show the complete pattern. One photograph revealed the edge of an oval opening and a transmission brace resembling the Pontiac's. By the noon deadline, Daniel had credible evidence, but no factory drawing. Andre signed a report limited to measurable facts. Ruth signed her alloy results. Nina exported the continuous video to 2 sealed drives. Daniel presented the reports to Lena beside the lot. "You found period modifications," she said. The challenge required one original factory race component. He indicated the matched SD marks. The delete panel and seat tag came from the same sequence. The drilled frame predates its original coating. The aluminum parts match the period and configuration. That is enough to stop destruction and continue authentication. Not enough to give you the car. Your card didn't say I had to prove the car's whole history in 60 seconds. It said find one component. Marcus asked to examine the original lot card. Nina retrieved the sealed sleeve. The wording was plain. Lena read it again. The bumper bracket can be removed. If it proves original, you receive it. The promise says car. The word can mean the object identified, not every loose and assembled component in the zone. Then why did you write it on the lot card instead of a parts tag? Lena did not answer. At 12:20, she ordered the Pontiac moved into Harrow's secure building. Daniel objected because the body and chassis could be separated during transfer. Marcus proposed new seals and a joint tow record. Daniel accepted. Refusing a safe move would make him look interested in control rather than preservation. The transport exposed a new fact. As the forklift raised the front, Daniel saw the rear axle housing. It carried extra webbing and suspension pickups positioned differently from a normal streetcar. A white grease pencil mark beneath grime read 007. Nina recorded it before the car entered storage. Breath. The repeated number became the second major loop. It connected the heater delete panel, seat tag, and axle, but no one yet knew what SD007 meant. That afternoon, Daniel contacted the Midwest Automotive Archive in Flint. Its collection included engineering microfilm donated by retired suppliers, but staff could not search thousands of reels overnight. An archivist named Grace Bell asked for physical landmarks rather than a theory. Daniel sent the oval opening, hole interruptions, delete panel stamp, and axle mark photographs. Grace found a catalog entry for SD full-size performance evaluation 1962, 1963. But access required permission from the donor trust. She could request expedited scholarly review on Monday. Lena's lawyer sent Daniel a preservation demand of his own. It accused Mason of removing the production tag from Harrow property and required its return. The tag had never left Harrow's evidence bag. Nina replied on the same email chain confirming custody. The accusation disappeared, but its purpose was clear: weaken Mason as a witness. Daniel told his son that no one had called him a thief in any public filing. "They were trying to," Mason said. "They were testing the chain. Why are you defending them?" "I'm not. I'm making sure we answer what they actually did." That distinction mattered to Daniel because he had once lost an insurance dispute by arguing against an accusation the insurer had not formally made. Anger expanded words. Documents narrowed them again. On Saturday, Reed Service Garage received notice that Harrow was suspending its 3 existing repair orders pending conflict review. The vehicles represented $11,000 in authorized work. Daniel returned the keys and diagnostic records without holding them for payment leverage. He invoiced only completed labor. His lead technician, Carl Benton, asked why the shop should act generous when Lena was starving their schedule. "Because those vans belong to employees who need them Monday," Daniel said. "And because our lien rights cover work performed, not work we hope to get." Carl had been with Daniel 14 years. He accepted the answer, but pointed toward the empty bays. "Principal doesn't cover payroll." It was the accurate criticism Daniel needed to hear. Daniel had enough reserve for 2 weeks of wages. He called every regular fleet customer and offered discounted preventive inspections to fill the schedule. He also postponed replacing the shop roof. When rain came through one seam that evening, Mason put a bucket beneath it without comment. The car had begun costing them before they owned a lug nut. On Monday morning, Grace Bell obtained donor permission to inspect the SD files. She invited one representative from each side to attend remotely while she viewed the microfilm. Daniel included Lena and Marcus rather than searching privately. Breath. The first reel contained expense sheets for a fictional special-duty engineering program evaluating full-size drag cars. Most test bodies were converted from normal production shells. One notation referenced chassis SD007 as a structural lightning development unit. The record described a drilled frame prepared on fixture J14, aluminum front components painted for corrosion testing, heater deletion, revised rear axle mounts, and a standard engine installed after the test program. The description matched the stripped Pontiac in Harrow's building, but the drawing for fixture J14 was absent. Marcus made the obvious counterargument. The documents could have inspired a later replica. Drag racers had copied factory methods for decades. Without a chain linking the shell to the engineering unit, SD numbers on removable pieces could have been assembled. Grace agreed. She found no vehicle identification number on the first reel. The archive did hold a shipment record. In November 1963, SD007 had been transferred to a supplier called Wallace Axle and Spring for evaluation, then sold as scrap without drivetrain under an experimental disposition policy. The buyer's name was redacted on the microfilm. That explained why the car had no famous race history, and why its engine was ordinary. It had been a development car, not a championship winner. Its significance lay in factory experimentation, not trophies. For Daniel, that made the object more interesting and less marketable. A race-winning car could sell itself. A development shell required careful interpretation. For Lena, the difference created an opening. She issued a statement to her board that the Pontiac was an unproven test assembly with no documented competition record. The words were accurate and designed to reduce Daniel's leverage. At noon, she invited him to her office. Harrow's headquarters overlooked the yard through glass walls. On Lena's desk sat the aluminum flake from the bumper bracket in a small evidence envelope. She offered Daniel $180,000, confidentiality, and reinstatement of the fleet contract. He would assign the lot card and any claim arising from the challenge. Harrow would fund authentication and decide whether to sell, restore, or sell. The amount was not a valuation. It was the price of certainty and silence. Why pay that for an unproven test assembly? Daniel asked. Because uncertainty has value at auction. And risk, which is why the offer expires today. She slid a second document toward him. It was a service termination notice. If he declined, Harrow would permanently end the fleet relationship for conflict and reputational risk. The notice did not threaten other customers. It exercised a contract right. "You're allowed to stop using my shop," Daniel said. "Yes. You're also asking me to tell no one why. I'm asking both sides to end a dispute." Daniel thought of Carl's payroll warning, the roof bucket, and Mason's college account. Sigh. $180,000 could stabilize the garage for years. He had not bought the Pontiac. He had answered a stunt. Then he read the restoration clause. Harrow could detach, sell, or discard any component after taking photographs. The body could become one auction lot, the frame another, the aluminum pieces a third. That would destroy the very relationships the evidence was beginning to prove. "Add a preservation covenant until authentication is complete," he said. Lena shook her head. "I won't let you control property you're selling me. Then you're not paying for a car. You're paying to divide the evidence. I'm paying you far more than a 1-minute promotion was worth." Daniel folded the unsigned agreement once and slid it back. Breath. "The minute is not what I'm protecting." That refusal was his midpoint choice. The fleet termination took effect at 5, Carl learned before Mason did. He sat across from Daniel in the waiting room and reviewed the cash forecast. 2 technicians could keep full hours for 10 days. After that, someone had to go, unless new work arrived. "Lay me off first," Carl said. "The younger guys have kids, you have a mortgage, and a wife with a job." Daniel did not accept the sacrifice. He reduced his own pay to 0, cut every technician to 4 days, and opened the shop Saturdays for retail work. It was not heroic. It was an operating plan with a 3-week limit. When Mason found out about the offer, he asked the question Daniel had avoided. Sigh. "If we win the car, and the garage closes, what did we save?" Daniel looked through the waiting room glass at Carl sweeping an already clean bay. "Maybe the car. Maybe a rule about promises. Not the garage. Mom would have taken the money." Ellen had been practical and unafraid of naming Daniel's pride. He could hear her saying that a preserved car was no comfort to unemployed men. "She might have," he said. "Does that mean you made the wrong choice?" "It means I owe the shop something better than believing I'm right." The family layer changed his next action. Instead of spending the week only on the Pontiac, Daniel built a service package for historic fleets, funeral homes, and small museums with older vehicles. He asked Ruth and Sinclair College to partner on documented inspections. He called former customers without mentioning Lena. By Thursday, they had 4 new jobs, not enough to replace Harrow but enough to postpone layoffs. He also invited Mason to sit in every financial review. If the boy was old enough to help bear the consequence, he was old enough to see the numbers without comforting lies. The archive search advanced through a less dramatic route. Grace found Wallace, Axel, and Springs' dissolved corporate records at a county historical society. One ledger recorded receipt of SD-007 shell and chassis, and later sale to a local drag racer named Emmett Vale for $550. The coincidence of the old sale price and Harrow's salvage minimum was not mystical. Nina had used the historical ledger amount after finding it in an intake envelope but had failed to recognize the rest of the record's significance. Her catalog note contained only old receipt, $550. The buyer, Emmett Vale, had installed an engine and raced regionally before dismantling the car in 1968. His son kept the shell in 3 barns over 5 decades. County authorities seized the final property after tax foreclosure, and Harrow acquired the contents through a documented liquidation sale. That chain established how the Pontiac reached the yard. It also confirmed Harrow had acquired lawful title before making the challenge. There was no prior owner waiting to reclaim it. The remaining technical question was whether the present body and frame were still SD-007 or a collection of pieces. Grace found a Wallace inspection photograph showing the underside. The frame's hole pattern was visible from an angle. Andre overlaid the image with his scan using 3 fixed landmarks. The patterns aligned, including the 2 interruptions and oval opening. Statistical coincidence was extremely unlikely. Still, a photograph was not the missing fixture drawing. Breath. The drawing emerged from a retired toolmaker's estate. Wallace had returned fixture J14 to a subcontractor for storage, and the toolmaker kept a folded maintenance copy. His daughter had donated it to Sinclair College years earlier in a box labeled Plant Layouts. Ruth found the index after Grace circulated the fixture number. No random expert arrived. The clue moved from car to archive, archive to supplier, supplier to fixture number, and fixture number to a known collection. The drawing specified 128 primary holes, diameters, center positions, and 2 deliberate blank zones around reinforced mounts. Andre entered the dimensions into his model without adjusting the scan. Breadth. 126 holes matched within factory tolerance. 2 differed by less than 1/8 of an inch, where the rail showed evidence of a period repair. The probability that a private builder had independently reproduced the complete hidden pattern before the drawing became public was remote. More important, primer beneath the reinforcement plates established that the holes existed during original assembly. Ruth's laboratory took tiny corrosion products from loose flakes, already detached inside the boxed rail. She did not cut the car. The coating layers matched samples from the heater delete panel, the same gray phosphate base, red-brown primer, and later black top coat. The frame and panel had traveled through the same early finishing sequence. Weld date analysis and the rear axle casting placed all major elements within the program window. The number 007 on the axle was grease pencil, not a permanent identity mark, but its aged layer sat beneath later grime. Together, the evidence did not prove every nut original. It proved the Pontiac was substantially the SD-007 factory development car described in the engineering file. Daniel sent the full report to Lena before releasing any summary. He offered her 48 hours to review and correct Harrow's ownership position voluntarily. That was her clearest chance to change course. Lena responded by acknowledging the car's likely identity but denying Daniel's contractual claim. She argued the challenge had been an advertisement requiring formal transfer documents, that Daniel supplied no consideration, and that car was too indefinite because Lot 118 contained multiple loose items. Her legal argument was not absurd. Promotional promises can fail when terms are vague, and vehicle ownership requires title paperwork. But the signed card named a condition, a time, a reward, a specific lot, and both parties. Daniel had performed in front of witnesses. Harrow also had an internal procedure for promotional transfers, and Nina had followed it. Susan Bell, the same attorney who had represented a local body shop in a warranty dispute, agreed to take the case at a reduced rate, plus recoverable fees. She filed for declaratory judgment and an injunction preventing separation or sale. The court issued a temporary preservation order based on the signed lot card, evidence reports, and Lena's proposed component separation. Harrow retained custody, but every seal became court-monitored. Neither side could move the body from the chassis. Lena's next pressure came through reputation. Harrow posted the original promotional video without Daniel's final explanation. The clip showed him scraping paint, saying factory weight reduction, and stopping the clock. A caption asked whether confidence had outrun proof. Daniel could have posted the archive drawings and accused Lena of hiding them. Susan advised him that public release would not violate the order, but Grace's donor permission covered legal and scholarly use, not unrestricted reproduction. Daniel made a 2-minute response from his shop. He did not call Lena dishonest. He said the frame had been scanned, the evidence was under court preservation, and both sides would present their contracts and reports through lawful process. He thanked Harrow's clerk for preserving the intake chain. The restraint disappointed people who wanted a fight. It also protected the case. Nina saw the response. 2 days later, she gave Harrow's attorney a memo documenting how the challenge was created. The promotion team had used the same signed card procedure 11 times. In each prior case, the winner received the entire named lot, not merely the object that satisfied the challenge. One winner found a rare radio knob in a truck and received the whole truck. Harrow's counsel disclosed the memo in discovery. Lena could no longer argue that car routinely meant component under company practice. She shifted to body versus chassis. Harrow's title described the vehicle body by public identification number. The frame carried no conventional number. She argued the lot card could transfer the titled shell, while Harrow retained the separately valuable development chassis as auction equipment. Susan asked Andre to map every body mount, and Ruth to compare factory joining evidence. Daniel supplied the practical interpretation. The body and frame had been assembled before the test program, modified as a system, transferred together to Wallace, and sold together to Emmett Vale. The signed card referred to the car on display, which physically included both. At a preliminary hearing, Judge Warren Pike asked Lena a simple question, clear-throat. When you told the crowd the car would be crushed, what did you intend the crusher to receive? Lena answered after a pause. The assembled shell and chassis. And when you promised the car to a finder? Marcus objected that intent was a legal conclusion. The judge sustained the objection, but the practical contradiction remained. The court ordered mediation before trial. By then, Reed's Service Garage had lost $27,000 in projected Harrow work. Daniel documented the loss without inflating it. New historic fleet jobs replaced 9,000. Technician hours remained reduced. The roof leak spread one tile farther. Mason began working Saturdays without logging all his hours. Daniel discovered it when payroll showed fewer hours than the boy had spent cleaning parts. You taught me not to make other people finance a dispute, Daniel said. I'm family. That makes accurate records more important. He entered Mason's missing hours and paid them, even though the money came from his own grocery account. The gesture was not sentimental. It defined the kind of business he hoped to preserve. Mediation took place in a conference room overlooking the courthouse parking garage. Lena brought authority to offer up to $400,000. Daniel brought no sale price. The mediator asked him whether that meant settlement was impossible. No, Daniel said. Transfer the Pontiac under the signed challenge. Harrow can receive a factual credit for rescuing it from the county liquidation. We release damage claims except documented lost work and legal costs. Harrow can sponsor conservation if the sponsorship doesn't buy control. Lena called that public humiliation, disguised as settlement. Your company made the promise publicly, Daniel said. Performance isn't humiliation. She offered the body, the loose aluminum parts, and cash, while retaining the drilled chassis for a separate auction. Daniel declined. She offered the complete car under a 99-year display lease, with Harrow keeping title. He declined. The mediator asked Lena why title mattered if Harrow would give Daniel possession for life. Because my company cannot let an improvised challenge transfer a historically significant asset, she said. It wasn't significant when you made the challenge, Daniel replied. That is exactly why controls exist. Her argument revealed the real institutional issue. Harrow wanted promotional promises to remain cheap when prizes were cheap and reversible when prizes became valuable. Enforcing the card would require changes far beyond one Pontiac. Mediation ended without agreement. 2 weeks before trial, an inspector found that Harrow had scheduled a non-destructive underside photography session. That was permitted. The work order, however, instructed technicians to remove 2 body bolts for camera clearance. Breaking the seals would violate the preservation order. The technician, Luis Mendoza, refused and reported the instruction to Nina. Nina notified both lawyers. Lena said a junior cataloger had used an old template and canceled the work. Daniel believed her, because the order did not benefit Harrow enough to justify contempt. Susan, nevertheless, requested a compliance conference. Judge Pike required Harrow to appoint an outside custodian and imposed a rule that no work order touching the Pontiac could issue without signatures from both counsel. He did not sanction Lena personally. The consequence tightened institutional control. The public proof came at trial 4 months after the challenge. The delay gave both sides time to build real cases. It also let the shop recover enough new work to survive, though Carl's 4-day schedule remained. Susan did not begin with the car's rarity. She began with the offer. Nina authenticated the lot card, company stamp, timestamp, and promotional procedure. Video showed Lena stating the condition, Daniel asking for it in writing, Lena signing, the timer starting, Daniel identifying the bracket and factory-drilled frame, and Lena stopping the process after performance. Marcus argued that Daniel's identification was an opinion, not a find, and that factory origin was unproven at the time. Ruth explained the alloy results in plain language. Andre displayed the scanned frame beside fixture J14. Green centers marked 126 matches. 2 yellow centers showed period repair deviations. Grace traced SD007 through engineering records, Wallace custody, Emmett Vale's purchase, county liquidation, and Harrow intake. Nina linked the seat tag and loose parts to lot 118. The intake photographs showed body and chassis assembled when Lena called it a car. Paul Vickers, Harrow's original inspector, testified for Lena. He said he had reasonably believed the holes were homemade because the car lacked an original engine, badges, and interior. He admitted he had not measured the pattern or tested the painted aluminum. That testimony made Lena more credible, not less. Harrow had made an understandable cataloging error. Its wrongful act was not missing the car. It was rewriting the promise after Daniel corrected the error. Marcus presented contract law. He argued there was no consideration because Daniel paid nothing and that a vehicle transfer required title formalities. Susan showed that performance supplied consideration in a unilateral offer. Daniel entered a timed inspection, created promotional content, and provided the exact act Lena requested. As for title, the court could compel Harrow to execute the paperwork after deciding the contract. Administrative formality did not erase the promise. Lena took the stand and gave her most honest explanation. If every entertaining statement becomes an unlimited transfer, we cannot run public previews, she said. Employees will expose company property without valuation or approval. Susan held up the lot card. Is that why your procedure requires a company stamp and executive signature? Yes. And whose signature is this? Mine. Did Mr. Reed ask you to write the promise? He asked me to document it. Did you have the authority to transfer lot 118 when you signed? Yes. Did the company honor the same form in the prior 11 promotions? Yes. There was no dramatic confession. The structure of her own controls answered the case. Breath. Judge Pike ruled from the bench on liability and issued written findings on remedy 2 days later. The signed card was a definite unilateral offer covering lot 118. Daniel accepted by timely performance. His identification of the aluminum bracket as a factory race component was later verified, and the frame independently satisfied the condition. Harrow's consistent prior practice established that the reward was the full named lot. The company had to transfer the titled shell, chassis, seat frame, and inventoried loose components together. The consequence extended beyond paperwork. Harrow had to revise its promotional control policy, so no executive could issue a transfer challenge without a pre-approved asset ceiling and written terms. It had to restore Daniel's documented inspection costs and the service revenue directly lost through retaliatory termination, offset by replacement work he earned. Daniel received no speculative future profits and no punitive fortune. Lena announced that Harrow would not appeal. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited. Daniel gave them one sentence. A written promise should become more careful when it gets expensive, not less binding. Then he returned to the garage for an alignment appointment. The Pontiac arrived at Reed's service garage 3 weeks later on a court-documented transporter. Daniel paid the $550 title amount and applicable tax because he did not want the record to depend on a free transfer technicality. Nina checked every loose component against the intake list. Lena came without a camera crew. She handed Daniel the new title. Sigh. My board approved the policy changes this morning, she said. Good. They also approved an offer to buy the car. It isn't for sale. You haven't heard the number. Then you can save the paper. Lena looked toward the Pontiac. You may spend 10 years making it worth less than an aggressive auction campaign would. Conservation isn't the same job as maximizing a hammer price. No, it isn't. This time she understood the distinction even if she did not share his preference. Daniel did not begin a glossy restoration. He and Mason washed only the areas approved by Ruth's conservation plan. They left the gray primer, black-painted aluminum, and empty engine bay intact. Andre mounted the scan on an interactive display so visitors could see how the hole pattern matched fixture J14. Grace supplied licensed copies of the development records. Every claim on the wall carried a source and confidence note. The project drew people who owned historically important cars but distrusted shops that promised to make everything new. A funeral home owner brought a 1938 coach. A small museum hired Daniel to stabilize a truck used in local flood rescues. A family commissioned documentation of a drag car their grandfather built. These were slower jobs with more paperwork and higher trust. Daniel created a separate conservation bay and charged for research hours as well as labor. Carl returned to 5 days. The roof was repaired before winter. No single check saved the garage. The Pontiac changed what the garage knew how to sell. Lena's company also changed. Nina became compliance director for promotional inventory. Harrow continued making videos, but challenge cards stated the exact lot, transfer conditions, authority limit, and dispute process. The content became less reckless and more credible. Viewers still watched. 6 months after trial, Lena asked whether Harrow could sponsor a public open chassis day. Daniel sent the request to the conservation committee he had formed with Ruth, Grace, Mason, and 2 independent collectors. The committee approved on 3 conditions: no auction estimates on the display, no implication that the car had won races, and all evidence sources visible. Lena accepted. At the event, men who remembered full-size Pontiacs leaned under the raised body and traced the frame pattern without touching it. Daniel explained that the car was a development platform, not a famous winner. Some visitors seemed disappointed until Mason showed how engineers interrupted the holes around load points and reinforced the axle mounts. The intelligence was in what had not been removed. Paul Vickers attended and stood at the back. He waited until the crowd thinned. I called it backyard drilling, he said. That was the evidence you had. I also had a tape measure in my truck. Daniel nodded. An understandable error could still contain a missed duty. Paul volunteered to teach an evening class on inspection mistakes. Daniel paid him for it. Mason built the first course display from the discarded black paint flake, a replica section of drilled rail, and side-by-side photos of random corrosion versus jig spacing. He did not claim to have discovered the car. His label said, "Seat tag located during documented lot inspection." That wording pleased Daniel more than any dramatic version would have. The Pontiac never received a made-up championship value. Insurers established a conservation value sufficient for protection, but Daniel kept the figure private. Its financial contribution was visible in booked work, apprentice hours, research contracts, and visitors who paid for classes. It became a rolling conservation project instead of a trophy locked behind velvet rope. On the first Friday of each month, Daniel lowered the car from its stands and rolled it by hand across the bay to keep bearings and seals from remaining loaded in one position. Mason recorded tire position, temperature, humidity, and every sound. The later engine stayed out. They planned to install a reversible display block only if research supported the correct configuration. Breath. One evening, after the visitors left, Lena arrived carrying the original challenge timer. Harrow had replaced it under the new policy. "It belongs with the story," she said. Daniel looked at the red digital face. "The story isn't about a timer. No, it's about what I wrote before I understood what I owned." He accepted the timer, as a loan, documented on a 1-page receipt. Mason mounted it beside the signed lot card and set it permanently at 17 seconds, the moment remaining when Daniel said the holes were factory-made. Beneath it, he installed no triumphant slogan. He placed Andre's measurement, maximum spacing variance, 0.03 of an inch. The next morning, Daniel and Mason rolled the Pontiac into the open doorway. Sunlight passed through the 128 frame holes and cast a measured row of circles across the clean concrete. Daniel moved the car forward 6 inches, so the circles aligned with Mason's floor marks. No crowd counted down. No camera demanded a reaction. Father and son stood on opposite sides of the chassis, each holding one end of a tape. Breath. What saved the Pontiac had never been luck hiding under paint. It was a pattern, a promise, and 2 people willing to measure both.